All right, I'm going to move on to the next set of stories. So, this one is going to be a little more difficult to get through. Yay. We've been talking about what happened at CPAC, which CPAC was just a conservative convention for people to get together and talk about how fucked up the world is right now and what conservatives can do to unfuck the world. So, during CPAC, there were some things that were stated that really are problematic for identification of transgender people. You had, of course, the very simple jokes about pronouns. You had Donald Trump, stating that he was going to stop chemical castration and sexual mutilation of children. Marjorie Taylor Greene, had her plan for, the bill that would criminalize doctors for providing gender-affirming care on a federal level. Over and over and over, you had these individuals. And the most egregious statement came from Michael Knowles. Now, I talked about Michael Knowles over in the pre-show when I was doing my makeup. Here is the quote from Michael Knowles. "The problem with transgenderism is that it isn't true. The problem with transgenderism is that it puts forward a delusional vision of human nature that denies the reality and importance of sexual difference and complementarity. The problem with transgenderism is that its acceptance at any level necessarily entails the complete destruction of women's bathrooms, women's sports, all of the specific rights and spaces that women currently enjoy. There can be no middle way in dealing with transgenderism. It is all or nothing. If transgenderism is true, if men really can become women, then it's true for everybody of all ages. If transgenderism is false, as it is, if men really cannot become women, as they cannot, then it's false for everybody too. And if it's false, then we should not indulge it, especially since that indulgence requires taking away the rights and customs of so many people. If it is false, then for the good of society and especially for the good of the poor people who have fallen prey to this confusion, transgenderism must be eradicated from public life entirely, the whole preposterous ideology at every level." Now, Michael Knowles has been called out for that statement. And basically from the moment after he finished speaking, criticism for what he said began to surface, especially when the language that he was using is genocidal in nature. Now, the idea of transgenderism is really what I want to focus on. I don't want to focus on Michael Knowles. Knowles is a talking head who was given a platform to essentially drum up the masses. His entire being at CPAC was to address an issue that will inflame the populace to vote in the direction that CPAC represents. So I don't want to focus on Michael Knowles. I want to focus on the word transgenderism. Transgenderism is a term that is undergoing a very interesting sort of redefinition. Transgenderism is a term that is used within academic, scientific, and social science circles. Transgenderism is referring to the experience and the presence of transgender people in the world. It is declaring that this group of people is a viable form of gender expression. It is not, however, being used that way in popular media. In popular media, transgenderism is used as a declaration of an ideology. In fact, if we go over to, this is the, let me get this right one here. Focus on the Family has put out what transgenderism means for them. If we look past these cultural and political forces, the issue is a little easier to understand. Simply put, transgenderism is a belief system, an ideology with no objective science. Even the American Psychiatric Association explains on its website that transgender is a non-medical term. It does not describe an actual medical or psychological condition. Instead, it is deemed a psychological, social, and even ideological identity. When discussing this issue, parents can trust that science and reason can help kids see through the confusion. Now again, that's Focus on the Family, using the language that Michael Knowles was using. But the difference is, Focus on the Family was conflating transgenderism as an ideology with transgender people, people who experience gender dysphoria, people who do not experience gender dysphoria but experience gender euphoria in manifesting themselves outside of gender norms. In terms of on the Republican circuit, this is from the New Republic. Here is how they are trying to walk back what Michael Knowles said. In 2020, the Oxford University Union held a debate on the resolution, "Religion has no place in public life." The proposition made arguments that religion is false, damaging, and divisive, and therefore warrants public exclusion and private disapproval. The opposition countered these arguments, but in doing so, the opposition did not resort to misrepresenting the proposition's contempt for religion as contempt for religious people. Even after the event, journalists did not accuse the proposition of being genocidal maniacs, nor did broadcasters denounce the proposition as fascist. Compare this to what happened after Michael Knowles said what he said at CPAC. Rolling Stone reported that, quote, CPAC speaker calls for transgender people to be eradicated, unquote. Other media outlets put out similar interpretations. When Knowles demanded retractions on the grounds that he said no such thing, Rolling Stone changed its headline to read, quote, CPAC speaker calls for eradication of transgenderism and somehow claims he's not calling for elimination of transgender people, end quote. Somehow, the writer in New Republic continues, only very weak ideologies and very insecure subscribers to such ideologies don't distinguish between belief and believer. Someone who believes religion has no place in public life does not call for religious people to cease to exist. In calling for transgenderism, what he identifies as a preposterous ideology to be eradicated, Knowles is not calling for people to stop existing, but perhaps some who have bought into the preposterous ideology, absent society's widespread affirmation, would move on from it. Declaring publicly that the emperor has no clothes may prompt him to get dressed, but how is that harmful? Again, that's from the New Republic. And it is an effort to walk back and define what Michael Knowles did not actually say in their opinion. The issue that I want to bring to light is a comparison issue from religion. Within conservative, evangelical, fundamentalist Christianity, there is a popular saying that we must hate the sin but love the sinner. You cannot have that. You cannot make that a reality. And the reason for that is just glaringly obvious. By saying hate the sin, love the sinner, you are defining the individual by the very act that you want to eradicate. To be a sinner is to be one with that quality that you hate. And to separate a quality from someone while at the same time identifying them as such, it's very hard to separate those. To try and do that means to have a deep and very complex understanding of personhood. But if you truly wanted to say what you want to say, you would say, hate sin that causes harm and love people who can be healed. That's what the difference is here. We're not talking about religious people having an ideology and therefore religious people need to be eradicated. We're talking about the idea that in eradicating the ideology is the experience of those people. There is no transgenderism without the experience of transgender people. Transgenderism does not exist if there are not people who do have this expression, this feeling that gender dichotomies or gender barriers are too restrictive. Transgenderism does not exist except from the testimony and the lived out realities of transgender people. So in moving to eradicate transgenderism, you have to convince every transgender person that their life is devoid of a quality. You have to let those transgender people know this thing that you feel does not actually exist. You are being confused by something. You are being misled by others. You are not who you experience yourself to be. And in invalidating a personal experience, who has the right to say who they are? By telling transgender people, Genevieve Bergman, you are not a woman. Because your experience may be that your experience is invalid. Well, then what limitation is there in saying to anyone, then your experience of who you are is invalid also? The removal of personalized identity and convincing people that what they experience, what they know about themselves is invalid, is the destruction of personality. I have come into my own in my personality because I realize I am Genevieve Bergman and I am a transgender woman and I'm going to live my life as a woman. Why? Because that is who I am. There is no confusion anymore. There was confusion when I was trying to portray the image of a man in society. There was difficulty, there were challenges, there were ways that I could not connect. But my experience now is more true to who I am. There is clarity. There is a defining quality about me that says this is truth. This is who I am. So when we hear individuals say transgenderism, the first thing we have to do is separate them. Is this coming from an academic source? Is this coming from a scientific paper? Is this coming from a sociology paper? Or is this coming from popular media? Because if it's coming from popular media, this language of transgenderism is intentionally dehumanizing the experience of transgender people, invalidating their own personal identity, and by using the words of these individuals, it is an attempt to get rid of transgender people.